This is the Fire Dog Podcast.
The views and opinions presented on today's episode are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.
Welcome, my name is Matt Wilson, and thank you for listening to episode 59 of the Fire Dog Podcast. In this episode, we dive into an after-action review of a hazardous materials storage facility fire at Kadena Air Base in June 2020. I speak with Chief Master Sergeant Kyle Rollins, who was the incident commander during the response, which was initiated by calcium hypochlorite, a material that presents unique and often underestimated hazards when exposed to heat and moisture. During this episode, we'll walk through the conditions that led up to the incident, the initial response and size up, and the interoperability between multiple agencies. Chief Rollins also shares what went well, what didn't, and the lessons learned that other departments can apply to their own response planning and training. It is my pleasure to welcome Chief Master Sergeant Kyle Rollins. Well, Kyle, welcome. It's great to have you, brother.
And thanks for having me, man. You guys have been doing this for several years now, and so I'm really honored to be on here and to talk about this incident back in 2020. And yeah, man, we'll jump right into it. And so yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, man, we've been doing it for a handful of years, and you and I, we go way back. And I should have had you on sooner, probably. Certainly a little bit closer post incident, post HazMat fire incident. But hey, here we are. So,
yeah, I mean, we started our career. We synced up back in 2012 at Kunsan. Definitely one of the highlights of my career. And it took a little while for this to kind of, I guess, propagate, just because post fire was like a couple years of kind of going through the SIB and AIB. And I'm sure if you reach out to Dan Linares, Chief Linares out there at Kadena, they still talk about this incident. And so there's a lot of lessons learned. Through that, and kind of what shaped me as a senior fire officer, now chief fire officer. And so I appreciate being able to share this and hopefully this not only prevent this from other installations, but really like your ICS and like how this can really help you out. And there's our crew's heading out to a call now, so it's an honor and privilege to be in the fire service.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. Listen to that in the background, man. A little
Yeah.
showmanship on Kyle Rollins' part. He had the guys rolling on an exercise real quick.
Hey guys,
yeah.
but
Hey, hit the sirens and lights real quick. Yeah, that's cool, man. Glad to have you on. With the SIBs and the investigations and all that. There's sometimes where I'll reach out to people, post big incident, you see it on the news or whatever, like, hey, let's get you on, let's talk about it. And people are always like, oh, hold on a second, like, let's wait a couple of years for the dust to settle, because I don't know what I can talk about and not talk about. I'm like, okay, good call. I don't want to put you in a tight spot. The crash in where was it? Louisville, Kentucky, recently, the real serious one. There was some Air National Guard guys that went out to that. And I know one of them, I reached out, he's like, let's let the dust settle a little bit, brother. I'm like, roger that.
yeah.
I had to shoot my shot, though.
I want to be your first. Yeah, because what you guys are doing is amazing.
Yeah, before CNN gets to you, I want to talk to you.
And then, through Talking Crash, I was on there and got to share some of this, and we'll talk about some of that today. But yeah, right. It's all about helping out the enterprise.
Cool. Well, before we get into that, brother, let the audience, hear from you. Tell us who you are briefly, maybe where you've been, how long you've been in the Air Force, whatever else you'd like to share.
Okay. So born and raised Columbus, Ohio. So Buckeye fan out there. Coming up on 20 years here next year.
Time to sign up.
Yeah. 20 years in the Air Force. Yeah. Come June. Still got a lot of runway left. Started off my career at Langley Air Force Base back in 2006. I was there for about 5 years. PCS there to Kunsan. That's where we met you, and a lot of other rock stars are still serving today. Went to Aviano, which is I'm back here for the second time, but Aviano, then to McConnell, and from McConnell to Kadena up to Yokota over here to Aviano. So been married 15 years. Definitely Megan, she's my rock. She's my better half. I got 4 children, Gabe, Grayson, Evelyn, Dottie, 11, 9, 7, and 5. And so they truly drive me to show up to work every day. And I'm just honored and privileged to be in this position and to really help others continue to grow. So, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, man, you're a guy that I know we're peers, but you're a guy I look up to, man. I've always appreciated your friendship and kind of watched your progress from afar. Just to just an example worth following, brother. So glad to have you on, and glad to have your family. Glad to see that your family is with you. I know that you've had assignments where they've had to be elsewhere. So it's cool to have them, and you got a tribe, dude. So
as I say, we got a little basketball team, man, and likewise, man, I loved our time there in Kunsan, and looking back, and where we're at today, it's like, wow, we are the future of the enterprise, and really developing the next generation. So yeah, it's a privilege to be here.
That feels like yesterday. Well, let's get into it, dude. Let's talk about the event. It was 2020, correct?
Yeah, 2020, June of 2020 is when this incident happened. There was some things that led up to it, and we were actually trying to overpack it, our EM partners, but I don't want to get too far ahead of it, so we'll kind of lay down kind of what this stuff is. So this is calcium hypochlorite. It arrived around 2018 timeframe. Was stored in the HazMat, like pharmacy, the LRS warehouse. And so over a couple of years, it degraded. It was recognized in 2020. So fast forward a couple of years, a lot of pictures on it, and you can see this stuff when it came in. It was packaged in like plastic, and then there was cardboard. It was all palletized, and so when they found it, it was just completely deteriorated and falling apart. And you could see this like basically powdered chlorine, laying on the ground in this storage warehouse. And so our EM partners were like, hey, we have the bandwidth to overpack this stuff. And so they started to overpack it. And so kind of as we jump into this, so about 2 weeks prior to the incident, they were overpacking it, and it off gas during that operation. So we responded to it and was like, hey, we need to kind of reattack this, how we're handling this. And so they created a robust plan to overpack it using level Bs and Tyvek suits, and we were kind of on standby. But ultimately, by them just walking on it and just kind of shuffling their feet was enough friction, enough heat that caused it. And once it's an oxidizing agent, so once it went, it just erupted. Thankfully, crazy. Thankfully everyone made it out. But yeah, we got the notification immediately, and I won't call pages. There's some Facebook pages out there that make you famous. But I was able to rip the video from someone that took that. But as soon as we left the station, you could see like a 200-foot fireball, and we were like, all right, boys, here we go, strap in.
Yeah. And so you said it was calcium hypochlorite, and it was delivered in around 2018, and there had been like verbal corrections through like inspections, correct? And they're being like, hey, you probably need to take care of this problem, because the pallet, as you mentioned, was kind of like deteriorating, right?
Yeah. So it's calcium hypochlorite. Can't get into specifics of why it's there, but it was throughout the Pacific Theater. So there was a lot of other bases that had this chemical available. But yeah, like through those inspections and through it deteriorating, we're like, hey, we need to overpack and move this and get this into a cool, dry space, because it was left basically not climate controlled and open rafters, and so it deteriorated over time.
Well, let's get into the response. So we talked a little bit about the conditions leading up to. I mean, there's not much more to say on it. This calcium hypochlorite was delivered, right? It was just sitting in there, probably not stored in the correct temperature. Some verbal corrections, never made the corrections. Our EM brethren tried to go in there and take care of the problem, and then, 22 June 2020, here we are, smoke and fire blown out of this place. And so tell me about that, man. Like, I guess your first introduction to it, when the tones dropped and you stepped out the side of the station, or, whatever. Just walk us through it.
Yeah, so I was the assistant chief of training at the time. So, call comes in 3150, and we're like, oh, like we know exactly, pretty much know what we're heading into. And so I jumped on Chief One with a slew of other fire officers and our chief at the time. And so as soon as we pull out the station, you can see it. It's about a half mile, in front of us, and just this big fireball in the air. So we knew it was going to be pretty complex. So we were just behind Chief Two and our truck at the time. So it was a full box response. We had, I believe, 2 engines at the time, 2 engines, the truck, ambulance, Chief One, and then of course, we're starting to shut down some stations and bring the rest of our resources, because we know this is a big one. So initial IC, they painted a pretty good picture. really need to paint too much of a picture when you're rolling up to this thing. You can kind of see it that you got heavy smoke and fire involved. But they made the right calls, went defensive operations, started setting their crews up. And it was just a surround and drowned operation. But at the same time, knowing this is a hazmat, pharmacy warehouse, like there's a lot of other things in there that like pretty bad stuff. So it was trying to get the shelter in place going, get people out of the zone. So security forces were a big part of that because it's right next to the housing area. So there was, those first 5 minutes are so crucial, on the fire ground. And I'll say that like the fire officer getting those trucks in the right position, on that the Alpha Bravo side and Charlie Delta side, and start the pull lines. It was helpful for us as the chief and I and a couple other senior officers rolling on scene. I think what was something I'll never forget as we're heading out there. The chief was like, "Hey, Rollins, when we get on scene, you got it." And so not exactly what you expect. I was, like, let's go. Like, this is my opportunity. And as we talk about some more of the strengths, like down the road, I can see how beneficial that was, not only for me, but for the team. Because when you have such a strong, senior fire officer corps that can handle those type of complex incidents, it allowed the fire chief to really like sync with the cat. You got a 1-star on base. You're in Japan, so there's a lot of PA. There's a lot of host nation kind of things you want to get ahead of and let them know what we're doing. So having that ability for him to go be the person in that role, like, just took all that pressure like off of us operationally. So that's something I definitely took away from and appreciate the opportunity.
Man, this is one of those events where, I mean, I don't want to say firefighters wish for fire, but let's be honest, man. We want to do our job, right? But when you hear that the pharmacy warehouse is up, like, and you know that some hazmat's potentially involved, it's like, oh, dude, like, this isn't the fire that I dreamed about, right? Like, this is exactly what I don't want to have to contend with. Like a single family dwelling, room and contents. I go save a baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of what you want. Now, unfortunately, in this case, you guys, so you were able to take accountability pretty early on, then, knowing that, hey, there's nobody in there. Like, we've accounted for everybody that's a part of this operation, so they could make the call to be defensive right off the bat.
Yeah, that's correct. So we knew exactly who was operating there, and they were currently overpacking, and so that was the first questions, is everyone out? Do you have full accountability? And they did. So, that life safety, incident stabilization, property conservation piece, it's running through your mind. And there, another big takeaway that's important for departments is like having those sets and reps, right? And you don't get sets and reps of a large hazmat fire, but you do get sets and reps day to day with those 1410 drills and pulling lines, and just having those SOGs drilled into where you don't have to micromanage as an IC. And so about 2 months prior to that, we had a fully engulfed house, to where we could we were able to get that sets and reps when it comes to like the ICS form. And we had Blue Card at the time, and I'm not to say like, hey, that's the best thing out there. There's a lot of ICS different platforms, but that's what we used. And it was well vetted. So leading up to that event, having that foundation was easy to get, everything in line. And another part too, being at Kadena, it's a large fire department. So, we had 82 firefighters out there that day, 134 total personnel on scene. So I believe we had like 5 or 6, senior NCOs. So when you're talking about, fire ground experience, that was super helpful too. So we had, had a fire chief and a chief master sergeant and a senior master sergeant that wasn't on scene, that they were like letting us just kind of run with it. And so that was like super beneficial. The fact that, the deputy was actually, in the ECC, because, one thing that occurs, like when you get a large fire like that, like the 911 phone calls just start screaming in. And so you're trying to get the shelter in place. You're trying to make the notifications, the dispatcher's trying to support us on scene. You're already trying to stand up the EOC. So, having those other chief fire officers, kind of take that kind of burden off, off the IC, where we're kind of both running that 10-2 checklist. was super helpful that we could just stay operationally focused and taking care of firefighters. So yeah, that was important. So we were able to get a level 2 staging up. So I had a master sergeant over there running the staging as we were, running through the firefighter recall. That's another blessing. Being at Kadena is, most of the firefighters are within a couple miles of base or on base. So we were able to get a recall pretty quickly because, you recommend shutting down flying. That is one of those spaces that just, it's the keystone of the Pacific. So not an easy task, but
they're always
be able
flying
to,
over there.
yeah. So to be able to shut that, shut the airfield down and we brought a crash truck on scene while we got backfilled, we could stand it back up. So it really helped to get the staging in place. And so we had the puck system that was super helpful with the Velcro. So we were able to check in with the IC. Hey, here's where you're going. Here's your attached to. I need red helmets, direct and black helmets, and yellow helmets. And so having that staging officer to say, hey, I got a crew of 4 on deck. I got a crew of 8 on deck was super helpful as we started to go through the rotations because it was a long day. It was a couple operational periods.
Yeah. Man, big incident. Talk to me about a little bit of like the interoperability with other agencies. How did that go? I always like to. I feel like we kind of stay in our silo, stay in our lane in the fire service. We think about it from our perspective, right? But I always like to, on a large scale incident like this, kind of think about how that interoperability went because you never really talk to each other until things go really bad, right? Or during an exercise when you're pretending that things are going really bad. And so always curious to see how that goes.
Yeah, we had a really great relationship. Being a large squadron, we worked a lot with our Sea Environmental. Environmental is always a big topic. I mean, it's a big topic everywhere, but with the PFOS and the PFOA things were going on, we were working real close with Sea Environmental, and that was that was one of the big agencies that where's all this runoff going? Are we able to continue to base? So they were instrumental through that piece. So we were coordinating really well. So once we got on scene, hey, you activating all these additional agencies. You need bio, you need security forces on scene, PA. You're just you're running through the 10-2 all these people that I need. But we were able to get them there relatively quickly because we were able to isolate the electric partially to the facility, but I had to see electricians, right there, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna shut down this grid." I'm like, "Cool, full send. Let me know when you get the power shut down." So they were able to isolate, all the electric. So we kind of took that hazard out. We only sprayed water, so Sea Environmental is like they're happy that we're not using AFFF or something like that. Just kind of increases some of the notifications and piece like that.
Right,
so
right.
they were able to kind of walk us through that. They were able to isolate the gates to keep the runoff, isolate to the base. We had security forces, they were getting those tactical control points, all set up. And so as we were fighting fire, then it's just like, okay, where's this stuff going? You don't have a whole lot of time to get all this like plume modeling, floating. So we had the EM, they were on scene, so they were starting to pull up their devices. We had bioenvironmental out there, they were playing as well, so they brought some monitoring equipment. So because at one part we actually had to move our ECP back a little bit because they're like, hey, we're picking up something, can't quite tell what it is, but it's something. So let's step it back. So we were able to relocate to a better position. So as far as the interoperability, I was super thankful. The other half of that really led to my success was I had a command aide. So I had another senior NCO, like I said, one of those blessings of a large department. But I had another senior NCO sit next to me, and he was running the 10-2 and the other response checklist as I'm able to kind of focus my efforts and really kind of putting the pucks to where people need to be as far as fire attack and your Alpha Division, Charlie Division. We had another ops chief, and so we were able to really get formalized everything, but having that person next to me, linked up with our ESF4 and the EOC and start to get ahead of some of these extra items that we would need was super beneficial. So those large scale incidents, we don't practice that a whole lot. Through the WIT, we might have this large scale incident, but we don't kind of think about, hey, what's it like to have that command aid, when you have multiple resources. So yeah, the interoperability was significant. And then even further so during the incident as, it's a surround and drown operation, but nothing's cookie cutter, right? So the roof collapses into the facility. We can't get in because it's deep seated. We're not going to, unnecessarily expose firefighters. You risk a lot to save a lot at this point. It's just like, let's just continue to throw water on it, put it out. But we were able to get structures on scene. And so they, their DART team, their damage assessment team was able to look at it and say, oh, hey, this is a structural column. This is a structural column. We can cherry pick some of this brick and mortar and actually remove the outer wall. And that's what we did. And so we were able to get a crash truck and some other hand lines, in there to ultimately put it out.
Talk to me about the IDLH, man. We're talking about hazardous materials that who the hell knows, you know what I'm saying? What's burning in there? Like, not only the IDLH and what we're telling firefighters that are immediately around the facility, but I think you'd mentioned kind of shelter in place or something like that for downwind facilities, and maybe even notifying the local community like, hey, this is burning and it could be, there could be some bad stuff in the air. Was any of that considered or, communicated?
Oh yeah. So the initial IDLH was like 500 feet, and it was, more importantly, it was like everyone's packed up, masked up, when they're pulling lines. Gotcha. And so we're
so
able
you guys
to
are probably
protect
burning
that
through some air then.
Yeah, burn through it. Another blessing is we have a mobile trailer, SCBA cart to bring that on scene. So, so we were about 1,000 feet away was our ECP, but 500 feet at the time while they were continuing to monitor to kind of close that gap, because that chemical kind of burned up relatively quick. So it went up, but super thankful that it was blowing east. And so like if it would have blown south, it would have went like right through housing, right through BX commissary, like it would have been much more traumatic. But and then you have this giant cloud, and all of a sudden it starts raining. So now you have like acid rain that's happening. So there was a lot of there was a lot of communication like through PA and getting the information out to the community about what's occurred. We had local helicopters above scene like, hey, this is actually happening here on the base. And so that PA rep and I don't have all the specifics on what the fire chief was doing, but I know like he's talking with the general, letting him know, hey, this is what's occurring on scene. Here's what's the EOC's rep prepping, but like here's that PA piece to start prepping and get that information out to the community. So we were super thankful that we were super thankful. And that's something, when you're going through these exercises, how often do you shelter in place? What's that look like? Is it feasible at your BX commissary area where you have a lot of patrons that are on your installations or in your community that, don't necessarily hear that giant voice all the time. So it took a little while. It's got to go through the wickets. And when you recommend shutting down flying, when you're trying to shelter in place, it's got to go through the command post, and having a DSF-4 rep right away and the chief up there right away saying like, hey, we need to get this done. And so, to my knowledge, I don't believe the installation has ever had a complete shelter in place like it did that incident. So I'm super thankful that we were able to get the maintainers off the flight line and undercover while we were continuing to extinguish that fire.
Man, I think we sometimes, or at least me, I take for granted our capabilities in the Air Force. We're so robust in like the resources that we have. I mean, you'd already mentioned how many firefighters are on scene, how many senior fire officers, you had a command aide, but even like the infrastructure to notify people, and then the people within the organization to notify people. So like, I think back to examples like that I've read like the after action for Paradise, California fires that killed, hundreds of people in that town. That wildland fire that started and it actually knocked out a cell phone tower. Well, their infrastructure for notifying residents, the community, was this app that people had to download, right? Like that was the system they had in place. And so it was a single point of failure, like the minute the cell service goes out, like nobody knows what the hell's going on. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen on an Air Force base. And that's, it's a really, that was a very kind of, I don't want like a rare event, like a very, 100 or 500 year event where that doesn't happen very often, where the wind was as strong as it was for Paradise, California. But like you think about that, and then you think about kind of the infrastructure that we have on Air Force bases and like how robust it is and like how on top of it, we are, like, we're just always like kind of ready to go. Like we're always eager to, to exercise our capabilities, right? Because it doesn't happen too often for us, but when it does, like everybody is on board. Like sometimes you'll notice like the electricians, they'll get out there before you ask them. right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
they know that, yeah, I have to shut power, yep, we already did it, but a lot of times when you call for it, you know what I mean? And same thing with maintainers on the airfield and all that airfield support. If there's a aircraft mishap, man, like they're like Johnny on the spot. So it's
Mm-hmm.
something that we take for granted that I just like to highlight and have some gratitude for, man. And then another thing is like, commanders, like wing commanders is like, equivalent to your city mayor or your city manager and then your mayor, right? Like you're in
Mm-hmm.
text message conversation with the fire chief, like, hey, tell me what's going on. That's always how it
Mm-hmm.
goes down. So,
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's cool to hear like, how well it's cool to see how well that interoperability works, when things hit the fan.
Yeah, it's such a large base like that. I mean, there's multiple. You got sister services there, and anytime you have a geo, as your installation commander, like that's a large mission, and just I think
Oh, I
about like
didn't
just being
realize it
like
was a general. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think about like just being that just giant machine, right? And so like when something like that happens, it's just like, man, you just get all the resources, at your disposal, which is great, for us, but like not everyone has that, and it's important to exercise that. Like, every base is a little bit different. Like, do I have those resources available? If at night, if that would happen at 11 o'clock at night, what's that look like? Do I have
Right.
electricians
Yeah.
available? Do I have environmental available? Like this happened around like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. Kind of start of the duty day. So um, so it's just we're thankful to have those sets and reps and to have these takeaways and lessons learned when everything goes well. And so but that's not always the case, right? So I
Yeah.
the active shooter hostile event, which I know they're changing some of the terminology, but through that course they were bringing up some of these apps, right? And so a lot of us use Facebook, as a notification tool or Signal
Hmm.
and some of these other things, but they're like when you have a
Hmm.
large scale incident and like everyone floods your Facebook page, like it just locks it up. So like you got to have multiple
Yeah.
tools, like ad hoc and some other avenues to get this out to the public. And one thing that they talked about was like having kind of like a ghost page. So when something does occur, that you can kind of fire this page up through the command post or through PA, and then do all the messaging through that, so it doesn't get bogged down. And so I've brought that up in some forums and just kind of get that think tank going of like what's that look like if we have large incident where just all the communication just overwhelms the infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about them, then. Let's talk about some of the strengths, some of the lessons learned. So yeah, first talk about like what went well, and I think you probably hit it, and you hit a lot of it, in kind of explaining how the incident went down. But I know you put together this brief for talking crash. Like, what are some of the strengths that you talked about that you'd like to convey to people?
Yeah, kind of going back to like what's your training plan look like? If I go into a scene as an IC and I say, hey, I want to go offensive quick attack, like, do I need to tell your crews anything else? And so, for those first 5 minutes on scene, when they said, hey, everyone's out, like go defensive, like teams went straight to, finding hydrants. Got a hydrant on the opposite side, got a hydrant on the Charlie Delta corner. And so they went straight to getting, we need big water, big water on the fire. And so by showing up just a couple, pretty much a couple minutes after, and I'm already like stretching lines, was a significant strength to get water on that. So I always talk about like, what does that look like for your
Yeah, they
department?
say like how the first line goes is how the fire goes. You'll hear a lot of guys say stuff like that. And of course, they're talking structured fire, but it's so important for those company officers, like the decisions they make within the first minute of arriving. They
Yeah.
dictate how the rest of the scene goes. Of course, we're talking about a defensive operation, so maybe you have some more time to think things through because you're not worried about, um, a potential occupant, right? That you're trying
Mhm.
to bring out of the facility. But how goes the first line is how the fire goes, and so it's so important to your point. But go ahead, man.
Yeah, and just for me, like I was an administrative section at that point at ACA training, and luckily, like or thankfully, I'd worked with both shifts, and so I had a pretty good idea of like knowledge, skills, and abilities on scene. So that was helpful. I knew who like the red helmets were and who the black helmets were. But so like having like in your department, like do you know everyone's capability? Do you know who that AC or someone who's going to fall underneath them, like can they execute, those standard operating procedures or guides or whatever you want to call them in your department? So that was super helpful. And then because for us as an IC, like we want to be structured. Like we want to be able to scale up and scale down, as as needed. And so having that large fire prior to, like, we had those sets and reps of like, what does accountability look like? Because at the end of the day, like, that's like, we're here to ensure like our safety as well as the safety of the others. So having that puck system, having an accountability officer, having a safety officer to make sure people are wearing the right PPE, like those were all, like, I look back and like, man, I'm super, super thankful that, everyone in those positions like absolutely owned it, and they had the right experience to ensure the safety and to ensure, the execution, of the operation. So those are the big ones. Some good handline operations, and they were grabbing 3-inch lines instead of, inch 3/4, so they went right to big water. We were able to get a crash truck, out there right away. So having the deputy fire chief, he was texting me on the side. He's like, "Hey, do you want a crash truck?" Like, absolutely, send it. And so we were able to, we were able to kind of work all that stuff outside of the radio channels and not plugging things up and letting, operate, like letting firefighters operate. So that was a big call.
And another thing on that is, sorry to interrupt you, but like I just thought about that, having the crash truck and all the trucks there, man. Like think about the water supply infrastructure. Like that's another thing we take for granted on Air Force bases, like how solid that is in most cases. Like you are pushing a lot of water onto this building, you know what I'm saying? And I know some bases, every one of them's different. For us at Eielson, we had to make a phone call, man. Like if we needed a lot of water, like, hey, can you guys open up all these valves and shut off some other ones to the public while we, handle business over here? But in most places, it's pretty damn solid and something we take for granted,
Yeah, you're talking, that's a lot of volume. And so they were able to kind of redistribute water there, which is super thankful. I've been to a couple bases where, it's a challenge, and so like, what does that look like? Do you have sprinkler systems? Like, do you understand some of the risk? And, but more importantly, those crash trucks operated for like 8 to 10 hours straight. I mean, we were literally fueling them on site. And so I give it up to the vehicle mechanics, for those trucks to operate the way they did was, just pure excellence, and what they do and the pride that they had to take care of those vehicles. Mm-hmm. So now that was some of the other, as we get into some of the challenges, some of the things that you kind of take for granted. But some other strengths. We talked about some of the ICS piece. Having the command aid was a big piece. Having the ability to shut down flying, get the crash vehicle, like those were all big strengths. Having the ability of just that many firefighters, to rotate in and rotate out.
Oh, for sure.
We were able to bring the cart on scene, and the cart was able to operate, for that amount of time. And as we're starting to rotate crews, so yeah, there was a lot of good takeaways from just from an IC standpoint. But at the end of the day, like it's not about me. It's about the team out there putting in the work. They're the one that are putting water on the fire, sucking air, like coming out. It's all a bunch of smiles. When you have that type of operation. But it's all the credit goes to those guys. I mean, 100%.
Sure,
like I'm just,
man,
I'm just,
rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I'm just orchestrating, keeping calm, of the chaos. So
we breeze over it a little bit, and I think you could pretty much figure out kind of, how this went. But I guess in a little more detail. So when they first showed up, it was a defensive operation right off the bat. Then you bring the crash truck, you put water on this thing. So how long were we putting water on it? How much was damaged? How much was saved? Like, did the facility eventually come down? Did the guys ever go inside for any reason, for overhaul or anything like that? Like, I mean, you're talking about burnt up whatever hazmat. You know what I'm saying? Like, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Do you put it in an overpack drum and ship it off?
Yeah. So it was ultimately the facility was a total loss. It was condemned, and so they worked like contracts for that cleanup because we didn't have the capability of overpacking all this, and so it sat there for roughly a year, if not longer, to do that part. Let's see what some of the other.
That's crazy. That's another unique thing about the Air Force, or the DoD in general, is that we have to, when we can't. You need military construction money to build new facilities, and you're talking about years out in some cases, right? We can't just like the local community, like, hey, let's start building it next week or next month or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so in a lot of places you'll see at Eielson, we had there was a house fire in like 21, and as far as late as 25, I think they started renovations on this house. And so there was this house sitting from 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, just like
Hmm.
burned
Yeah,
up, you know what I'm saying? With
just
burn
vacant. Yeah, just
scars and
vacant.
vacant, because
Yeah.
they have to work through the process of, doing the insurance adjustments and then finding the money for it and, all these different things. And same thing applies to like that base owned infrastructure, those facilities. Like you can't just, we had I keep using Eielson as an example, but there was a roof collapse because of a snow load. And like on this really big facility, this facility is still sitting there with the roof collapsed. That was again around 21 or so. And here we are in 2025, almost 2026, and there's still a collapsed roof. Like this is just to tear down a building like that, you're talking about a multi-million. So even just to tear it down, for somebody to hit with a
Mhm.
jackhammer or whatever, it's like it takes a long time to find the money and then to go put those contracts out for bid and then of course you have the environmental restrictions that add this,
Mhm.
significant cost if it's an older building. And then now you're talking about hazmat. So you got to find the right people that can clean up hazmat because you don't want to send in, airmen to put stuff in
Yeah.
over. Like you could send in airmen with shovels or whatever, but it's probably not the right answer, So
Yeah. Yeah. It took a while to come to fruition for that part, and it's not funny, but yeah, previous base was the same way. They had a large house fire, and it sat vacant for a while because just the amount of loss. I mean, so this particular fire was like a $2 million loss, which drives a Class A mishap, and then you got everything that comes
yeah.
happen with SIB and AOB and all that piece. But yeah, that structure was a brick kind of like townhouse configuration at my previous base, and so everyone was vacated, but it took a long time to write up those contracts and get the bids and everything to demolish that facility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what other strengths you got, brother? Or if you've hit them all, we can move on to, some areas for improvement.
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of move on to some areas of improvement. When it comes to strengths, I think it just real comes down to like what's your I always look back and like what's your like how are you training this? If you have this large scale, like how often are you working with your wood to like get the right injects to make sure that you're getting the right muscle fibers that are working to see what type of capability that you have. And so, we had a lot of experience there because that's a very active, close to 1,000 calls a year, some of those other bases. So a very, very, very proficient crew at the time. So I'm super, super thankful for that.
Yeah, as much
Um,
as we hate like large scale base exercises, they're so important when push comes to shove, because when that moment hits and you've already worked through some of the kinks, at least for like the communications, and I'm not talking just fire department, but kind of on a broader scale.
mhm.
You've worked out some of the kinks on how do you communicate, how you stand up the EOC, like logging into the computers at the EOC, like those little
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
in the moment, it's, during the exercises, I don't think realize it, but when the moment hits, and I've been a part of a handful of large scale incidents, and there's a couple that, again, at Eielson just in the past year, right? And when it goes down, man, you really appreciate that, that you do exercises and that you exercise through some of those little things. But it's important at the tactical and operational level too. Like you don't want to have to think about things, and we talk about a lot on this podcast. Like when you arrive to, um, low frequency, high risk event, you're
mhm,
not going to have time to think things through, right? Like your initial decisions are going to have to be muscle memory, right? You're going to have a mental Rolodex. Um, and what you do ahead of that incident, months and years and
mhm.
throughout a career, is going to build that mental Rolodex. And so it's just so important, man. I can never, not bring up the importance of training for things like this.
Yeah, I go back, you're quoting the old Golden Graham, right? And it's just like slow down, and so there's a lot of truth to it. There's a lot of truth to that. To like I'm going through that mental Rolodex and like what can I compare this to? Um, And so, like for that incident, like I couldn't compare that to anything. Like I've never had this large hazmat incident before, and so it gave me a lot of confidence. It gave the team a lot of confidence on our capability, and so and like you said, you talk about like the training, like that's what leads up to that. Like if you have, if you're, even if you're tabletopping, like this is what this looks like, and then go out and do some time trials. Like how long does it take to drive from point A to point B? And as we
those
get
little
into
details matter.
some of these takeaways, I mean, there's a lot of things that I learned that day that, you take for granted. And, one of them is how long does it take to shelter in place? How long does it take to shut down flying to get these resources? And I was super, super thankful. That was that occurred pretty quickly. But as simple as fuel, right? We're out there for a while. Crash trucks are, they're giving me their fuel levels are at 3/4 or a half a tank. And we've already requested through the EOC, like, hey, we need some fuel. And this isn't, a ding to anyone, but one thing I realized was like, there's not a lot of jerry cans laying around. Like, how am I getting, I can get you a fuel truck, but I can't get you a fuel truck close enough to where I can reservice. Like, how are we going to fill these things up? And so, we were, the EOCs, they're trying to get us the resources, right? And it took a point to where the trucks actually ran out of fuel, and they actually, and I learned from this, like once you get low, like you have to shut the truck down. Like you can't let a crash truck run out of fuel because it's got to be primed to turn back over. So our vehicle maintenance crews, like we were able to escort them in there, and able to do that for us. And so that was something I learned that day that I thought would take like 20 minutes to get fuel, like took a little bit longer than expected. Another one was we're calling the EOC and we're like, hey, I need generators, right? You're working on LMRs, you got your iPad and other resources that need to be powered up. You need to get lights. And so I'm like somewhat like a fire and forget, like, hey, I need generators. In my mind, I'm thinking they're going to bring me these like little Honda generators, good to go. And, they follow back up and in a few minutes and like, you need 30 amp, 50 amp, 100 amp. And I'm like, I just need this type of generator. And so, those are things that, that you like, you don't think about when you're just like, I need generators, I need lights, I need food. You're just kind of going through, kind of the sets and reps of the request. Another one was, so it started to rain. It was like, okay, I need tents. And FSS was like, we got you. So I in my mind, I expect them to come up with the, the foldable, like pop-up tents that you take to your, your football games on the weekend. And they show up with these like tent style, like carnival. It takes like 12 people to erect. You probably see them, the big old like white tarps. And so those are just the lessons that, that I learned that day that, you have to be specific. I need accordion style, like pop-up tents. So like, I'm super thankful. Like they were bringing anything that we asked, but going back to that, I was like, man, I'm going to be much more like specific on my requests.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for incident commanders. Not only the specificity, but just appreciating as an incident commander the time that it takes. Like, don't forget where you came from. Like, don't forget how long it takes to find it on the shelf, load it into a truck, drive it to the scene, put it up, and enlist people to help you to do that, right? Like, as an incident commander, we're just moving down a checklist in some cases, right? Don't be a checklist jockey, or, appreciate what you're asking. And appreciate the time that it takes, and put that into your decision-making algorithm. Like, okay, I'm probably going to have tents. Best case scenario, 30 minutes, worst case scenario, 2 hours, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, as we get into some of our operations, like here at Avion specific, and, we have some high level, I guess, response type of scenarios. I'm just trying, I guess, speak around a little bit, but I'm in the, I get the opportunity to be in there with the MSG commander and the wing commander and say, hey, this is, we need to request these things early, and this is this type of stuff that we're going to need to support this type of event. So some of the operations here, they're sending up, full on like nipper and zipper and like all these extra things. And like, we went out and exercised it about a month ago, and, you think you're going to get it in 30 minutes, and like, it takes a couple hours to do this. And so it depends on the airmen that you bring and everything else. So it was really good, like lessons learned on like, what if we actually have to go do this thing, like this is some realistic expectations that we have to have. And so, maybe not calling for this first, but hey, let's go ahead and call this other thing first, because we know it's going to take, 30 minutes for this versus an hour for that. Right. So
well, you think about even people, not everybody's sitting in a fire station like we are now. Fortunately, I think for you in this case, it was during the day. And of course, that's when the risk is higher, right? Because more people are on base. And in this case, there was people moving, hazardous materials around in the building, trying to to get them out of there, right? So, and that's what initiated the event, right? It's something like this is probably not going to happen at night in most cases, right? Your risk is going to be higher during the day, but for those at night incidents, you're like waking somebody up. Like, so number one, hopefully we have the phone number, right? Number two, hopefully they wake up to the phone call, and then they got to put clothes on, get in the truck, like, so just another thing to consider. And I know a lot of people know that, but it's always worth mentioning. Cool. Well, we'll try to finish up some of these lessons learned. Rather, what other lessons learned would you like to share?
So some of the, I guess the takeaways that we kind of get into is like like understanding risk. We all have like a SOC or CRASOC, facility risk assessment tool that we use in prevention. Those are definitely some good takeaways. As I've kind of utilized like moving forward as a fire chief. And I provide this brief. It's kind of like one of my kind of kickoff briefs because there's a lot of pictures and good video. And I ask them like, where's our 3150? Like what are we what are we missing? So having a deep dive and just driving around, called Jolo, just out looking around. You go find some of these areas on the weekend and making sure that we're postured to set up for that is definitely something that I focus on when it comes to operation and the prevention side. Another big takeaway is like, what's your relationship with the wing commander? Have you had those opportunities to kind of sit down and say, hey, this is, we talk a lot about our response matrix and kind of our levels of service as far as capability wise, but more importantly, like, what does that capability look like? We have this type of incident, like this is what you're getting. Testing the recall, how long does it take to get your folks? Because from this base, here at Aviano, like it's going to take a couple hours to probably get folks. If they're even in town, it could be 2 to 3 hours away, enjoying the sights of Europe, and so it's important to know like what that what that looks like. The finance piece, that was a lesson learned. We were asking for food, right? And it's all about like, well, who's writing the check? So when you have these weight exercises, like let's get some food for our responders. If we have a 6 to 8 hour exercise day, let's get some food. It got to the point where our chief fire officers had to go pick up pizzas and buy Gatorade for everybody. And so
Wow.
not atypical. Super thankful for them to go do that, but that was definitely helpful for the crews in rehab. And one of the other big takeaways is like, are you ready for the SIB? So one of the smart things that the chief did at the time was like, he grabbed his 3-ring binder and he just started pulling all the documents, grabbing going through the NICE system, grabbing all the radio traffic, grabbing all of our ICS forms, grabbing all the fire prevention records. And so it's you think like, if, of course that stuff's coming, but for him to centralize all that and gain all that, all that information at one source. So, when PACAF, came down, it was just like, here you go. Here's, here we are, like open book. Here's how the response went. Here's what things led up to it. Here's all the information. So that was super helpful. And actually, I did that similar with another major fire that I had at my previous base, because it was a big stakeholder fire. And so that's something that I definitely took away from that. And and going in more in depth is asking like, what's our FSDs look like, and what's our fire prevention like? Have we looked at real property, and like, are we making sure we're doing what we should be doing and identifying and recognizing these type of risks? And I tell the guys, like, when you get into those HazMat facilities and stuff that it's not your typical business, walking through the MPS, like, slow down, make sure that we can understand like what we're looking at, and that it's stored appropriately, and has the right separation distances and right suppression system. So like all that stuff is like super beneficial and important. So there was a lot of good takeaways from that.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate your time, brother. Thanks for taking the time to share your lessons learned, the strengths, like just highlighting the event at Kadena in 2020. We do this just like the Chalk and Crash to share these stories so that people can learn from them, and maybe they can implement some kind of things within their departments or within the ways that they do business as a company officer or a firefighter, an incident commander, to make sure that they can provide the best service to their base, to their community. So thanks for your time, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate it. At the end of the day, like, it's all about protecting our external stakeholders as well as the firefighters, and everyone in the department. So we talk about, with my team here is like, where's our 3150? What are we missing? And, how are we, what keeps you up at night? Is it that fuel farm over there? Is it our aircrafts? Are we getting enough hands on? So that's important, because at the end of the day that, we say that your worst days are every day, so when that 911 phone call comes in, they don't want, two goobers in a pickup truck. They want, world-class marathon runners, precision, doctors that are going to, take this, fix the situations. And so, there's a lot of pride that walks around this department, of how well we operate. And so I'm super, super thankful to be part of this team. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share this. Hopefully the video and everything, it comes through really well. But yeah, looking forward to do this more and talk on crash. And I'm happy to be part of the Air Force enterprise, and thankful to to be here today. So thank you for what you're doing, and continuing to get folks on here to share their experiences, and that's what makes us all better at the end of the day.
Yeah, brother. Well, great way to end it. I appreciate you, Kyle, and you have a good one, brother.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fire Dog Podcast. You can find more episodes like this on our website, firedog.us, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on social media. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Fire Dog Podcast. That is the Fire DAWG Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow so you can stay plugged into every new episode. We'd also appreciate it if you'd share this podcast with your friends or coworkers, whether on social media or right there within your firehouse. This is Matt Wilson with guest Kyle Rollins. Till next time, stay safe.